When you hear Yoko Ono's name, what images or thoughts immediately pop into your head? It will most likely be a divisive person, John Lennon or one of the Beatles. Yoko Ono is among the most famous and divisive women of the last several decades, so I can see why. Her marriage to John Lennon, a famed member of the rock band the Beatles, catapulted her into the limelight. Yoko is hated by some and blamed for the breakup of the Beatles, while others admire her as an artist and activist. But what actually happened? The horrific events of her life, when told in their entirety, will shock you. Her life narrative, apart from this contentious public figure, has been quite stunning and tragic. Yoko Ono can be better understood after reading this. Finally, let's get down to brass tacks and reveal the shocking truth about Yoko Ono. Yoko Ono came into this world in Tokyo, Japan on February 18, 1933, to parents Isoko and Eisuke Ono. Her dad was a famous pianist and banker. Her adopted grandfather was a Yasuda, therefore she came from a long line of powerful families. I'm happy to tell you that it's a band of samurai. I know the ninjas. Zaibatsu was a powerful financial company that was also controlled and operated by the Yasuda clan. Yoko literally means ocean child when written in kanji. In the 2 weeks leading up to Yoko's delivery, her father Eisuke had to leave for San Francisco. When Yoko was born, Eisuke wasn't there. Yoko first met her father after the family relocated to San Francisco. She had just turned 2 years old. Additionally, Yoko's sibling Keisuke is younger than her. In 1937, after a brief stay in San Francisco, Yoko and her family relocated to Japan, where she commenced her formal education. Gakushuin was a top school where she was educated. The piano has always been a passion of Yoko's. Between the ages of 4 and 12, she spent nearly 8 years in piano lessons. Although Yoko was proficient on the piano, it wasn't her sole instrument. She was also proficient in playing the koto and shamisen. Both of these musical instruments originate from Japan. The family relocated to New York City in 1940, marking their second American adventure. Hanoi became their new home when they left New York. It was back to Japan they went. At this same moment, one of the worst nightmares she had ever experienced occurred. Yoko was in Tokyo when WWII broke out. During the whole conflict, she remained there. A horrific firebombing occurred in Tokyo on the evening of March 9, 1945. The Tokyo Great Air Raid was another name for it. Yoko witnessed every horrific event. She took cover in an Azabu bunker. Even though she was in a safe place, she was aware of what was going on outside. Ono and her family eventually settled at Kurosawa Mountain Resort. It is common knowledge that conflict can cause numerous problems. One of those fatal problems is not having enough food to consume. As far as anyone can tell, Yoko is the expert. The threat of famine was real for her and her loved ones. Because of this, they had no choice but to practically beg for food. Everyone in the family used a wheelbarrow to transport their possessions from one location to another throughout the day in that kind of setting. It was at this moment that she realized she belonged nowhere. Additionally, she discussed this event in an interview. Nevertheless, her perseverance was noticeable throughout that period. Thinking back, she saw her history as a formative experience. However, there was more. The family's situation was so dire that Yoko's mom had to barter their possessions for food. In one such case, her mother exchanged a sewing machine manufactured in Germany for 130 pounds of rice. Unfortunately for Yoko and her mom, her dad wasn't around to see it all. His current location was Hanoi. His captivity in a Saigon incarceration camp was later verified by Yoko. Yoko and her family immigrated to America and eventually made Scarsdale their home when the war ended. Yoko didn't. She did not leave Japan. Is Gakushuin, her school, still fresh in your mind? She registered there once more. The war thankfully spared the school. The future emperor of Japan, Prince Akihito, was a classmate of hers at that school. Her classmate was him. Vocal training was Yoko's primary focus when she began taking singing lessons at the age of 14. After finishing her secondary education at Gakushuin in 1951, she made history again by enrolling in the philosophy department at Gakushuin University, where she was the first woman to do so. She did not finish her program at Gakushuin before she left. Perhaps she didn't truly love that university, or maybe she was just trying to make a name for herself. In September 1952, she made the decision to finally join her family in New York. She was accepted to Sarah Lawrence University. Even though she only stayed until 1956, she also dropped out of this college. to elope with her lover at the time, Toshi Ichinagi, was the reason she departed. His star was on the rise, and he was a Japanese composer. During the period, Toshi attended Juilliard. Since Yoko's parents were unhappy with her social circle and lifestyle throughout college, they sensed this coming. They said that Yoko was negatively affected by them. Yoko studied poetry at Sarah Lawrence. In case you were curious, it would appear that she has a deep appreciation for the arts based on her hobbies: singing, playing instruments, and reading poetry. Returning to her college, I suppose. In addition to studying music composition, she delved into the English language. Alban Berg and Arnold Schoenberg were two of her favorite composers. These guys were masters of a certain musical style called tone composition. Yoko gave this 12-tone thing a go on her own. Her instructor thought her style was a little strange and unusual, so that didn't go over well. Returning to New York after her time at university, Ono assumed the positions of secretary and instructor of Japanese arts at the Japan Society, a non-profit organization working to improve ties between Japan and the United States. Do you recall Toshi, the man with whom Yoko eloped? Well, in 1956, he and Yoko exchanged wedding vows. Sadly, 1962 was the year that the pair parted ways. We'll delve deeper on Yoko's impact later on in the video. Focus on the positive ways this connection benefited her for the time being. Since it determined Yoko's course for the future, this friendship was crucial to her. It was with Toshi's assistance that Yoko became acquainted with New York's avant-garde art scene. Yoko had her Manhattan loft and was hosting events there 4 years into her marriage to Toshi. She received assistance with these matters from her fellow composer, Lamonte Young. John Cage's music was an influence on both Yoko and Lamonte. Composer John Cage was well known. Later on, in 1961, Yoko made her Carnegie Recital Hall debut. Her daring act and music were experimental. She reached a new professional high point with this performance. After this, she began to be recognized by others. Yoko was also artistically inclined, therefore she had no shame in showing off her conceptual artwork. She primarily showcases her work on the Chamber Street series. One of her well-known paintings is To Be Stepped On, which she created while active as an artist. Ingenious in its simplicity, a stray piece of canvas sprawled out on the ground. Respect for art is essential, and that was the message conveyed by this work. You won't find it on the floor. The wall is where it belongs. Finally, we reach her relationship with Toshi. While Yoko took an emotional hit when the marriage broke up, she also struggled with depression after moving in with her parents in Japan. She even spent time in a mental institution, so this was no laughing matter. Just think about how that connection affected Yoko. Yoko was given another opportunity in life in terms of relationships. The 28th of November 1962 was the day that Yoko and Anthony Cox were married. So when we say together, we mean that they tied the knot. Anthony supported the arts and worked as a film producer. Can you make out the link? Art is it. Art served as a bond between the two. In order to overcome her despair and get herself out of that mental facility, Yoko needed Cox's support. They were enjoying each other's company when, out of the blue, their marriage was nullified on March 1st, 1963. The reason behind that is that Yoko and her ex-husband Toshi never actually finalized their divorce. The difficult times were brief. The pair was remarried on June 6, 1963, after Yoko sealed the deal. They had a baby in August, so it was a huge month for them. On August 8, 1963, Kyoko-chan Cox was born to Yoko. When the baby was born, their marriage began to struggle. They continued to support one another and prioritize their professions. Despite that, they continued to perform together at Tokyo's Sogetsu Hall, despite their tense relationship. Following that, the couple and their child returned to New York. Cox took on a lot of responsibility for Kyoko as Yoko was so engrossed in the arts. For the majority of that time, Yoko was absent. Cox played the role of a hero by caring for his daughter and managing Yoko's public image. When Yoko took part in Gustav Metzger's Destruction in Art Symposium in September 1966, she continued to make history once more. Because no other female artist has ever been invited to do her own thing, we refer to this as history. There were only 2 women invited to speak, and she was one of them. You could say Yoko Ono was smoking hot. In the midst of all this stress over work, the relationship has taken a back seat. Yoko and Cox did everything they could to keep their marriage from falling apart, but to no avail. On February 2, 1969, the couple unfortunately filed for a divorce. We may now go on to the most contentious aspect of Yoko's biography, which concerns her relationship with John Lennon and the Beatles. John Lennon wasn't Yoko's initial encounter with the Beatles. When she visited Paul McCartney at his London home, it was her first meeting with the Beatles. A songwriting manuscript by Lennon and McCartney was the reason for the visit. She intended to buy it for John Cage since he needed it for his book notations, which was being written at the time. Because he didn't think John would be on the same page, McCartney was adamant about keeping it for himself. Lennon did not let Ono down when she approached him. The word's original handwritten lyrics were presented to her by him. It was in London's Indica Gallery on November 7, 1966, that Lennon and Yoko first met formally. On the very day that Yoko had an exhibition at the gallery, Lennon happened to be there as well. The work was a conceptual art piece titled Unfinished Paintings that focused on interactive sculpture and painting. Thanks to the proprietor of that gallery, John Dunbar, their encounter came to fruition. It was he who set them up with each other. One piece of Yoko's art in the gallery caught Lennon off guard. Yes Painting was the name of it. Yes, a white ladder topped with a magnifying glass was used in painting. After climbing up the ladder, Lennon studied the word yes under the magnifying glass. The problem is that it's hard to find anything redeeming in conceptual art. Lennon was pleased by the positive work that was done through art. That Lennon appeared to adore Yoko's art is not new information. Hammer and Nail was the name Yoko gave to one of her artworks. No frills, just like the name. Come inside, and the task at hand was to drive a nail into a white painted wooden board. Because he loved it, Lennon wanted to try it out before it went public in exhibition. However, Yoko made him stop. Now, can you recall Dunbar, the gallery owner? Seeing that Yoko was rejecting Lennon, he attempted to sway her by assuring her that Lennon is a wealthy and may potentially purchase it. You can probably guess Ono's response. Everybody knows that she met John Lennon and the Beatles in the past, but she pretended she had no knowledge of them. After that, they had a flirtatious and cordial exchange, and Yoko let him strike the mark. An actual spark flew. It was an unusual circumstance, and Yoko even acknowledged her feelings for him in an interview from 2002. The story of love begins now. Yoko and Lennon began writing letters to each other as a means of maintaining communication. Even Yoko's conceptual artworks were sent to him by her. Seeing each other became a natural progression from there. Let us not forget that Lennon was wed to Cynthia during this period. Returning to the subject of Yoko and Lennon, their relationship reached new heights when Lennon deceived his wife about his sponsorship of Yoko's exhibition. Lennon was apprehended and interrogated by Yoko's wife when she placed a call to him. Lennon downplayed the significance of the speech by claiming that Yoko was unfairly criticized for her avant-garde behavior, even though this was not true. The writing of Lennon's song Julia marked a turning point in their relationship. Ocean Child beckons me is a sentence in that song's lyrics that if you read them carefully you'll see. Ocean Child is the meaning of Yoko's name, as we said earlier in the video. Because of this, Yoko was mentioned in the song he composed. Lennon once had Yoko over for dinner while his wife was on vacation in Greece. This occurred in 1968. Yoko and Lennon had a sexual encounter that evening. On an album called Two Virgins, they even worked together and composed a song about it. After Cynthia returned from her vacation, she found them. Yoko's reply was rather unexpected as she remained composed. Cynthia was in her bathrobe when she instead remarked, "Oh hi," while sipping tea. That was not the last chapter. Happiness is a Warm Gun was the name of the next song that Lennon composed for her. Sexual allusions abound in this musical composition. Yoko experienced a miscarriage while she was pregnant with Lennon's child. Not long after John's first wife's divorce, something happened. John Lennon's death was the final straw that broke their 11-year relationship. The year 1980 saw the murder of John. The topic of Yoko's connection to the Beatles will now be discussed. During an interview, Paul McCartney brought up an incident from the album's final mix. He brought up the fact that the band was strained because John brought Yoko, his wife, to the recording sessions. The Beatles, Paul, Ringo Starr, and Harrison all thought she was a negative influence who disrupted the group's flow of creativity. In a podcast, Paul further stated that Lennon was the sole rationale for their tolerance of Yoko Ono. She was the source of the constant interruptions to their routine, but they respected him too much to confront her. The group felt uneasy with the move, as Paul noted, because the Beatles had usually collaborated closely with producer George Martin. They were silent in opposition since they cared deeply about the band's unity. Having said that, it did not occur. Is this terrible rumor concerning Yoko true? That is the big question now. Did she actually break up the Beatles, or is she just a phenomenal musician? Yoko Ono is undeniably one of the most divisive figures of our time. Some think she's conceited, while others think she's brilliant. However, the documentary Get Back, which focuses on Peter Jackson, did reveal some truth. The release year was 2021. Yoko was unfairly accused of disbanding the band for a long time because of the interference she caused. On the other hand, this documentary represented a change of viewpoint. This proved that having Yoko around the group was actually beneficial. Instead, it was non-active. Yoko Ono deserves serious consideration because of the significant impact she had, as shown in an exhibition at Tate Modern. Considering her life story, it's clear she was a genius, so I don't think this sounds inappropriate. She was a leading figure in the Fluxus art movement, which sought to demonstrate the significance of art in life after having dropped out of college. Who could deny her brilliance as an artist after enduring works of such renown as Cut Piece, in which she urged viewers to sever her garments in order to illustrate the horrors of war? Some industry insiders think it's ridiculous to suggest that Yoko broke the band on her own. Get Back, a documentary, shows Yoko enthusiastically participating in all of the band's activities, including rehearsals, without interfering. Despite the media's misleading portrayal of her throughout the years, this documentary set the record straight. Yoko was the target of criticism and ridicule for almost a decade of her career, as any serious fan of her music can tell you. Great as it was, not everyone enjoyed it. She would undoubtedly gain a devoted fan base if it were shown at this very moment. People today would really enjoy that kind of art. Whatever the case may be, she was the target of racist and stereotypical attacks from the American and British press, as well as some of the Beatles' own fans. She gained a terrible reputation for no good reason, since this continued for years. She was held responsible for the breakup of the Beatles because of her reputation and the negative portrayal she had. The other members of the band were able to avoid the media's relentless criticism and use it as an excuse to deny any involvement in the breakup. Ono acknowledged that racism and sexism contributed to her being cast as a scapegoat. Not many people spoke out against the pervasive racism and sexism that existed back then. In contrast to today, the tragic reality of Yoko's life was thus revealed. No matter how much you want to believe that she was the driving factor for the breakup of the Beatles, you can't deny that she certainly couldn't have pulled it off on her alone. Nobody can deny the profound impact she had on the art world. What a remarkable woman. Please share in the comments which of Yoko's conceptual works you admired. Your time here is appreciated, and we'll see you in the future video.